He thought he was just slapping an elderly woman in a diner. What he didn't know, her son was one of the most powerful men in the country. You know how some mornings start off completely ordinary, and then within seconds, everything flips upside down? That's exactly what happened one Friday morning inside a family-owned diner in Roanoke, Virginia. The smell of bacon and fresh biscuits hung in the air, waitresses balanced plates with easy rhythm, and old Motown played low from a jukebox in the corner. Most of the customers were regulars, folks who came every week, sat in the same seats, ordered the same meals. Among them was Evelyn Brooks, a 72-year-old black woman who had served this country proudly in the Army decades earlier. She was known in town not just as a veteran, but as someone steady, polite, and kind. Evelyn was the kind of woman who never had to raise her voice to command respect. That morning, she sat in her usual booth near the window, glasses resting low on her nose as she unfolded the newspaper. She'd ordered her favorite, 2 scrambled eggs, wheat toast, and black coffee. Nothing fancy. Just a simple meal she'd enjoyed every Friday for years. But just a few tables away sat a man who couldn't have been more different. Travis Hensley. In his late 30s, stocky build, baseball cap turned backwards, tattoos climbing up both arms. People in town knew him for the wrong reasons. Bar fights, DUIs, a short fuse that could explode over something as small as a football game or a parking spot. Travis wasn't eating quietly. No, he was running his mouth, loud enough for everyone to hear. His target? An older man at the counter who had some trouble walking, his cane leaning against the stool. "Look at him wobbling like he's going to tip right over," Travis sneered, laughing so hard he slapped the counter with his palm. "Bet he takes 10 minutes just to tie his shoes." A couple of younger guys at another table chuckled nervously, not really sure if they should laugh or stay quiet. The older man at the counter shifted uncomfortably, clearly embarrassed, but he didn't say a word. Evelyn looked up from her newspaper. She watched for a moment, hoping Travis would quiet down on his own. But when he kept going, Evelyn slowly folded her paper, placed it neatly on the table, and stood. She walked over to his booth, posture straight, voice calm but firm. "Son, that man's done nothing to you. Why don't you show a little respect?" The diner fell silent. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Even the waitress stopped mid-step. Travis turned his head slowly, eyes narrowing. "Excuse me?" he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You heard me," Evelyn replied, steady as a rock. "We don't tear down folks in here. Let the man eat in peace." For a split second, it seemed like Travis might laugh it off, but his face tightened. His pride got the better of him. And then, out of nowhere, he stood, leaned across the small gap between them, and slapped her across the face. The sound cracked through the diner like a gunshot. Plates clattered. Someone gasped. Evelyn staggered slightly but caught herself, refusing to let him see her fall. Every pair of eyes was glued to them. The jukebox kept playing, but nobody heard the music anymore. And here's the thing, in that one moment, Travis had no idea whose life he had just collided with. He thought he was smacking down an elderly woman who wouldn't fight back. What he didn't know, what no one in that diner could have guessed, was that Evelyn's son wasn't just any man. He was Jordan Brooks, the director of Homeland Security. And that single slap was about to set off a chain of events Travis could never have prepared for. But before we get to that firestorm, let's talk about who Evelyn really was and why she carried herself with such quiet power. Before we dive into the chaos that slap created, you have to understand who Evelyn Brooks really was. Because if you only saw her as a 72-year-old woman sitting in a booth with coffee, you'd miss the depth of her story. Evelyn grew up in Norfolk, Virginia, the daughter of a dock worker and a school teacher. Life wasn't easy, but her parents raised her with backbone and faith. When she turned 18, instead of following the path many expected, marriage, maybe a job at the local post office, she shocked everyone and enlisted in the U.S. Army. That was the late 1960s, a time when women weren't exactly welcomed in uniform, and a black woman, even tougher. But Evelyn didn't join to prove anything to anyone. She joined because she believed service mattered. She believed in discipline, structure, and doing her part for a country that didn't always love her back. During her years of service, she worked as a communications specialist, handling classified transmissions, maintaining composure in moments of high stress. Fellow soldiers remembered her calm presence. They used to joke, "If Evelyn says it'll be all right, then it's all right. She never panicked, never raised her voice, but she got things done. When she returned home after 2 decades in uniform, she didn't brag about her service. She didn't hang medals all over the wall. Instead, she quietly slid back into civilian life, raising her son, Jordan, with the same discipline and steadiness that had defined her career. Her neighbors knew her as the type who shoveled her own walkway in winter, who sent handwritten cards for birthdays, who brought casseroles when someone was sick. But what people admired most was her poise. She could be standing in a room full of gossip and anger, and her calm silence would make others lower their voices. Now, that dignity is what Travis Hensley had just tried to strip away inside the diner. And the irony was, Evelyn wasn't confrontational by nature. She didn't look for fights, but she also didn't let disrespect slide, especially when directed at vulnerable people. One of the waitresses, Marcy, had worked at that diner for 15 years. She once said Evelyn reminded her of her grandmother, a lady who could break you down with just a look without ever yelling. And she was right. Evelyn believed in correcting wrongs without raising her hand. Her words usually carried enough weight. That morning, when she approached Travis, she didn't do it for herself. She did it because she couldn't stand watching him humiliate an older man at the counter. She knew what it felt like to be belittled. She knew how cruel people could be, and she wasn't about to let it happen in front of her. So, when Travis's hand cracked across her face, the silence that followed wasn't just shock. It was disbelief that anyone would dare. Because if you'd spent 5 minutes in Evelyn's presence, you'd know she was the last person who deserved that. She steadied herself, hand pressed lightly to her cheek, but her eyes stayed fixed on him. Not angry, not frightened, just steady. Almost as if she were telling him without words, "You'll regret this, son. Not because I'll hit you back, but because life has a way of correcting men like you." People in the diner whispered. Phones were out now, recording. Marcy's hands shook as she clutched a pot of coffee. The man with the cane at the counter turned his head away, too embarrassed to meet Evelyn's eyes. Travis, puffed up by his own pride, smirked as if he'd won something. But what he didn't realize was that he'd just started a battle far beyond his reach. But before we get to him, let's take a closer look at Travis himself and how his past had shaped the bully he'd become. Now let's shift the focus to Travis Hensley, because people like him don't just appear out of nowhere. There's usually a trail behind them, a pattern that stretches back years. And in Travis's case, that trail was littered with trouble. He grew up in Roanoke too, but unlike Evelyn, he didn't have much stability. His father drifted in and out, mostly out, and his mother worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. By the time he was 14, Travis had already been suspended for fighting 3 different times. Teachers said he had a chip on his shoulder, but truthfully, he was angry at the world and didn't know how to channel it. As a teenager, he discovered alcohol early. He'd bragged to friends about sneaking beers out of his uncle's fridge. By his 20s, he wasn't sneaking anymore. He was a regular at the roughest bar in town. Everyone there knew him as the guy who'd pick a fight if someone so much as bumped his stool. He worked odd jobs, construction, landscaping, hauling scrap, but nothing ever lasted long. He'd get into arguments with his bosses, quit without notice, or show up late one too many times. And every time he'd spin it as if the world was against him. Nothing was ever his fault. Police reports told their own story. A DUI when he was 25. Disorderly conduct at a high school football game when he was 28. Another arrest for getting into a fight at a county fair. Each time, he got off with fines or probation, never anything serious enough to sit him down and make him change. People in town had grown used to him. If he walked into the diner on a Saturday morning with a hangover, no one was surprised. If he was red-faced and yelling at someone in the parking lot, it was just Travis being Travis. He was the kind of man folks crossed the street to avoid, but not the kind they thought would go too far. What made him dangerous wasn't just his size or his temper. It was that deep insecurity, that need to prove himself by tearing others down. Mocking an old man with a cane gave him a twisted sense of power. And when Evelyn told him to stop, it wasn't about her words, it was about his ego. He felt challenged, exposed, and he reacted the only way he knew how, with violence. What's worse is that Travis wasn't completely friendless. He had a small circle of drinking buddies who laughed at his stories, encouraged his behavior, and sometimes even egged him on. They weren't really friends. They were just people who liked chaos as much as he did. That morning in the diner, 2 of those buddies were sitting nearby. They chuckled when Travis mocked the man at the counter, but when he slapped Evelyn, even they went quiet. One of them muttered, "Man, you shouldn't have done that." The other just stared at his coffee, refusing to look up. Because here's the truth. Bullies love an audience, but even their so-called friends know there's a line. And Travis had just crossed it in public, on camera, with a woman most of the town respected. What Travis didn't understand in that moment was that his small-town reputation was about to collide with a national stage. He thought he was still just the loudmouth everyone tolerated, but in seconds, his name would be attached to something much bigger, something he couldn't drink his way out of or joke away with his friends. But before the rest of the world caught up, let's go back inside that diner and see how the incident escalated from a few cruel jokes into an act that changed everything. The diner that morning had started like any other. People laughing, forks scraping plates, coffee being poured. But once Evelyn stepped in to check Travis, the entire atmosphere changed. You could feel it. The air got heavy. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Even the jukebox track playing in the background seemed out of place, like it belonged to another world. Evelyn stood in front of Travis's booth, steady, unflinching. The older man with the cane kept his eyes low, pretending to stir his coffee, but his hands trembled. "Son," Evelyn said again, her voice low but firm, "we don't treat people like that in here." Travis smirked, leaning back in his seat like a king being challenged in his throne. "You think you can tell me how to talk? Lady, sit back down and mind your own business." Evelyn didn't budge. She didn't raise her voice. Respect isn't too much to ask. That's when it happened. Quick as a spark, Travis shot to his feet, the legs of his chair screeching against the floor, and his hand came across Evelyn's cheek with a crack that echoed off the walls. Gasps filled the room. A fork clattered onto a plate. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Evelyn stumbled but caught herself on the edge of the booth. She pressed her hand lightly against her cheek, but kept her eyes on him. No tears, no retreat, just steady eyes that said, "You'll answer for this." For a moment, no one moved. Then Marcy, the waitress, slammed down the coffee pot she was holding. "Travis! What the hell is wrong with you?" she shouted. Travis puffed up, trying to play it off, his chest heaving. "She came at me. She got in my face. Ain't nobody tells me what to do." Across the room, one of his so-called friends muttered under his breath, "You messed up, man." Phones were already out. At least 3 customers had them pointed straight at Travis. The slap wasn't just an act of violence now. It was evidence. Evelyn slowly straightened her back, brushed the newspaper ink from her hands, and spoke. Her voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "You've shamed yourself today." That was it. No yelling, no curse words, just a single sentence that made Travis's smirk falter for the first time. An older man from the corner shouted, "Call the cops!" Another customer was already dialing, whispering frantically into her phone, "Yes, we need police at Betty Lou's diner. Yes, right now. A man just hit an elderly woman." Travis looked around and finally noticed the phones aimed at him. His face flushed red. "Y'all better put those down," he barked. But nobody did. If anything, more phones came up. Marcy, hands on her hips, glared at him. "You need to get out before you make this worse." Travis laughed, but the sound was hollow now. "Worse? Ain't nothing worse about this. She got in my face. I handled it." Evelyn shook her head slowly. "No, you showed who you are." The police sirens hadn't even arrived yet, but in that moment, everyone inside the diner knew Travis had crossed a line he couldn't uncross. His pride had led him straight into a public disaster. And here's the twist. He thought the humiliation ended there, inside those 4 walls. He thought the cops might haul him in, maybe he'd pay a fine, maybe spend a night in jail. But what Travis couldn't see, what none of the customers knew yet, was that Evelyn's son was Jordan Brooks, director of Homeland Security. And the moment those videos hit social media, Travis wasn't just a local hothead anymore. He was a national headline. But before the cameras and the world caught up, let's look at what happened inside that diner in the minutes right after. The fear, the shock, and the witnesses who refused to stay silent. The slap had landed, and for a long second, silence clung to the diner like a heavy fog. Nobody breathed. Nobody chewed. Then, slowly, the room came alive. Not with laughter or conversation, but with fear, shock, and outrage. Marcy, the waitress, was the first to move. She grabbed a stack of napkins and hurried to Evelyn. "Honey, are you all right?" Her voice trembled, but her hands were steady as she tried to help. Evelyn just nodded, brushing her off gently. "I'm fine, dear." "Don't worry about me." But it was clear this wasn't fine. At a booth near the back, a high school kid named Ryan whispered to his mother, "Mom, did you get that on video?" His phone was already raised, recording every word. His mother, shaking, nodded without taking her eyes off Travis. Another customer, a middle-aged truck driver named Carl, muttered under his breath, "That boy's lost his damn mind." He shoved his chair back, standing halfway as if ready to step in, but unsure if he should. The man with the cane at the counter, Travis's original target, slowly turned his head to look at Evelyn. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. "I'm sorry, ma'am." "I should have said something." Evelyn gave him a small, steady smile. "You've got nothing to apologize for." Meanwhile, Travis stood like a storm in human form, fists balled at his sides, chest heaving. He scanned the room, daring anyone to challenge him, but the only sound was the soft chorus of phones clicking on, cameras recording, voices whispering. "You all better quit filming me," he barked. He pointed at Ryan, the teenager, who froze for a second before saying, louder than he expected, "Nah, man, people need to see this." That one sentence broke the dam. Several voices joined in. "He hit her. She's a veteran, for God's sake. Somebody call the cops already." Marcy had already done it. She stood near the counter, phone pressed to her ear, her voice sharp. "Yes, an assault. He hit an elderly woman. Yes, she's conscious, but you need to hurry." Travis tried to defend himself, his words spilling out in a messy rush. "She came at me first. She was in my face. I was just defending myself." Evelyn, still calm, answered so everyone could hear. "No one threatened you, son. You lost control. That's on you." The way she said it, steady, measured, made him look smaller, even though he towered over her, and the phones caught every second of it. The truck driver, Carl, stepped forward, putting himself between Evelyn and Travis. "That's enough. You need to sit your tail down before the cops drag you out." Travis sneered, but something in Carl's stance made him hesitate. He didn't sit, but he also didn't swing again. His chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, eyes darting nervously from the cameras to the door. Minutes ticked by like hours, and then, faint at first, the sound everyone had been waiting for, sirens. They grew louder, closer, until flashing blue and red lights painted the diner windows. People exhaled. The weight in the room loosened, just a little. Phones stayed raised, though. Nobody wanted to miss what happened next. Evelyn didn't move. She didn't run. She didn't even press her cheek again. She simply stood tall, as if she'd weathered far worse storms in her life. And maybe she had. Travis, though? He looked around, realizing the walls were closing in. His swagger faltered. For the first time, a sliver of fear flickered in his eyes. But outside that diner, a whole different storm was brewing, because the moment those videos hit the internet, Evelyn's son, Jordan Brooks, director of Homeland Security, was about to find out what happened to his mother. While Travis stood in that diner, sweating under the weight of flashing lights and phone cameras, across town, another man was finishing a quiet breakfast of his own. Jordan Brooks, Evelyn's only son, was at his home office in Arlington, a 2-hour drive from Roanoke. For most people, the morning had been about errands, traffic, or the weather. For Jordan, it was classified briefings, phone calls from Capitol Hill, and folders stamped confidential. Jordan wasn't just another government employee. He was the director of Homeland Security, a role that put him at the center of some of the country's most difficult decisions. He oversaw counterterrorism units, cyber defense strategies, and emergency responses. On any given day, he might get a call about a potential threat in Los Angeles, a hurricane forming off the Gulf Coast, or a data breach targeting government servers. But here's the thing. No matter how serious his job was, Jordan never stopped being his mother's son. He called her every evening without fail, even if just for 2 minutes, to ask if she'd eaten dinner, if she'd remembered to take her medicine, or if she needed anything around the house. That morning, as he scrolled through his emails, his phone buzzed with a text from a colleague. It wasn't work-related, just a link, no explanation. Jordan frowned, clicked it, and up popped a shaky cell phone video from inside Betty Lou's diner. He didn't recognize the diner, but within seconds, his heart stopped. The video showed his mother, Evelyn, standing tall, speaking calmly to a man who looked agitated, and then, smack, the slap. The sound was unmistakable, and Jordan's stomach dropped. The video kept playing. He saw her catch herself, heard the gasps, watched her stand her ground, even after the hit. He recognized that look on her face. It was the same look she had when he was a boy, and she told him, "Son, we don't back down from what's right." His hands clenched into fists. For a moment, the director of Homeland Security wasn't in the room, just a son. A furious, protective son watching someone lay hands on his 72-year-old mother. Jordan replayed the clip, barely able to breathe. He didn't care about the phones, the witnesses, or the diner walls. He only saw his mother. A knock came at his door. His deputy director, Alan Reeves, stepped in. "Sir, I think you need to see this." Jordan looked up, eyes blazing. "I already have." He turned the screen so Alan could see. Alan froze. That's your mom?" Jordan nodded. His voice was tight. "Yes, and that's the man who put his hands on her." Alan didn't know what to say. He started to mumble something about police procedure, about letting the local authorities handle it, but Jordan cut him off. "This isn't just about police procedure. That's my mother. That's a veteran. That's someone who's given more to this country than that man ever will. And he thinks he can humiliate her in public?" Jordan's voice cracked, raw with anger. Alan swallowed hard. He knew this wasn't a moment to argue. "What do you want us to do, sir?" Jordan exhaled, steadying himself. "First, I want to make sure my mom is safe. Second, I want every piece of footage from that diner saved. And third," he paused, eyes narrowing, "I want the world to know exactly who she is." For Jordan, this wasn't about throwing his weight around. It wasn't about politics or power. It was about respect. Respect for his mother. Respect for veterans. Respect for every elder who deserved dignity, not abuse. But while Jordan prepared to move, back in Roanoke, the cops had already walked through those diner doors, and Travis was about to realize his world was collapsing in real time. When the officers finally stepped into Betty Lou's diner, their boots echoing against the tile floor, all eyes snapped to them. The first officer, a tall man with sandy hair, scanned the room before resting his gaze on Evelyn. She stood calmly, hands folded in front of her, the faint red mark on her cheek still visible. The second officer turned toward Travis. "Sir, step away from the lady." Travis raised his hands halfway, trying to sound casual. "Look, it ain't what it looks like. She got in my face." "Step away," the officer repeated, firmer this time. Phones were still recording. Dozens of eyes followed every move. Travis hesitated, pride and fear locked in a battle behind his eyes. Finally, he stepped back, muttering under his breath. Evelyn didn't speak right away. She didn't need to. The cameras caught her calm stance, the quiet dignity that seemed to shout louder than Travis's excuses. The officers asked her if she wanted medical attention. She shook her head. "No, thank you. I'm all right." Then, in front of everyone, one of the officers turned to Travis. "You're under arrest for assault." The handcuffs clicked shut, and the diner erupted, not in cheers, but in murmurs of relief. People whispered, "Good," and "About time." As Travis was led out, his friends trailed behind, their faces pale. The moment the door shut behind them, the room buzzed with overlapping voices. Marcy brought Evelyn a glass of water. The truck driver clapped her gently on the shoulder. The man with the cane whispered, "Thank you, ma'am. Thank you." But the story didn't end at that diner door. Within an hour, the videos hit Facebook, Twitter, TikTok. By afternoon, local news stations were calling it the diner slap incident. By evening, it was on national headlines. Hashtags started trending. Hashtag respect our elders. Hashtag veteran strong. Hashtag justice for Evelyn. And here's where the weight of it grew heavier. When reporters realized the woman in the video was the mother of Homeland Security Director Jordan Brooks, the story exploded. Commentators on talk shows debated it. Veterans organizations released statements of support. Politicians tweeted about respecting those who had served. Meanwhile, Jordan held a press conference. Cameras clicked furiously as he stepped to the podium, his expression tight but composed. "My mother, Evelyn Brooks, is 72 years old. She served this country honorably in the United States Army for more than 2 decades. Yesterday, she was assaulted in a public diner for standing up for another elderly man being mocked. This isn't just about her. This is about the kind of nation we are. Do we honor those who have given? Do we protect our elders? Or do we let bullies shame them in public? His voice didn't rise, but the firmness in it carried weight. My mother taught me discipline, service, and respect, and what happened to her will not be ignored. Clips of his speech went viral. People who had never met Evelyn felt like they knew her. She became a symbol, not because she asked to be, but because she represented dignity standing against cruelty. As for Travis, jail wasn't the only consequence. The video followed him everywhere. His name was dragged through headlines. His employer cut ties with him. His so-called friends stopped answering his calls. And everywhere he went, people recognized him, not as Travis Hensley, but as the man who slapped a 72-year-old veteran on camera. Evelyn, though, refused to gloat. When reporters asked how she felt, she simply said, "I hope he learns." Anger can ruin a man's life. Respect can save it. Her words struck harder than any punishment the courts could give. But before we close this chapter, there's one last piece of this story, the resolution, the moral, and why this moment matters beyond a diner in Virginia. Weeks passed after the incident, but the video didn't fade. It stayed alive on timelines, reshared with captions like, "This woman is tougher than most men I know," and "Respect your elders." Always, Evelyn never asked for the spotlight, yet it found her anyway. At first, she was uncomfortable with the attention. Neighbors brought flowers to her door. Strangers mailed thank you letters to the diner. Veterans groups sent plaques, calling her a symbol of resilience. Evelyn smiled politely, grateful, but she kept her life simple. Every Friday, she still walked into Betty Lou's diner, ordered scrambled eggs, wheat toast, and black coffee. Same booth by the window. She wasn't going to let one man, or even the internet, change her routine. Travis, on the other hand, couldn't escape. Every time he left his house, he felt eyes on him. Parents pulled their kids closer. Former drinking buddies ignored him. Job offers? None. Even the ones who didn't care about the law cared about the cameras. Employers didn't want his name attached to theirs. In court, he tried to spin the story, called it a misunderstanding. But the judge wasn't swayed. With multiple camera angles, witnesses, and Evelyn's quiet testimony, the truth was undeniable. Travis was sentenced to time in county jail and mandatory anger management classes. But the harsher punishment came outside the courtroom, the loss of whatever respect he still had in that town. For Evelyn, the trial was never about revenge. She told the court plainly, "I don't hate this man, but I hope he understands the weight of what he did. A slap can last a second, but the shame of it lasts much longer." Her son, Jordan, stood beside her through it all. Reporters kept pressing him about whether he used his influence behind the scenes. Jordan answered the same way every time. "Justice doesn't come from titles. It comes from truth. My mother didn't need me to fight this for her. She stood tall on her own." That's what struck people most. Not Jordan's title, not the courtroom, not the headlines, but Evelyn herself, an elderly veteran who refused to let disrespect break her. After the sentencing, Marcy, the waitress, approached Evelyn outside the courthouse. "I just want to say thank you. You showed all of us that standing up matters." Evelyn smiled, adjusting her glasses. Standing up isn't always about swinging fists. Sometimes it's about standing steady, no matter what's thrown at you. That became the heart of the story. It wasn't about a diner. It wasn't about a slap. It was about the lesson woven into it. Respect is not optional. It's the foundation of how we live together. And when respect is absent, chaos takes its place. Evelyn went back to her booth every Friday, back to her paper, her coffee, her peace. And every so often, a stranger would approach, shake her hand, and quietly say, "Thank you for what you did." She always gave the same gentle reply, "Do the same for someone else." And that's the challenge this story leaves behind, because disrespect doesn't always look like a slap in a diner. Sometimes it's ignoring an older neighbor. Sometimes it's mocking someone who's struggling. Sometimes it's just choosing silence when you should speak. Evelyn's story is a reminder. One voice, one steady stand can shift the entire room. You don't have to yell. You don't have to fight. You just have to refuse to let cruelty go unchecked. So the next time you see someone being mocked, dismissed, or mistreated, remember Evelyn Brooks, the 72-year-old veteran who stood tall even when struck down. And remember this, bullies win when good people stay quiet. Respect wins when we choose to act. If this story moved you, don't just click away. Share it, talk about it, and most of all, live it. Show respect. Protect dignity. Be the person who stands tall.